Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, a senior news editor for job search and careers at LinkedIn. Welcome, as always, to our wonderful show where we talk all about finding a job during this difficult time, and we also answer your questions. So I'm so happy you're here today. As always, I want you to introduce yourself into the comments. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, what you're looking for in the job market. And then what I want you to do is network with each other. Networking is so important for a job search. So what better time to start than now? Connect with people who maybe are in your area. Maybe they're at the area you want to move into. Maybe they're in the industry you want to move into. So network together and you could actually help each other find jobs. Maybe you can bounce resumes off each other. Someone may know someone at a company you want to go to. It's a great time to network. And since there is a pandemic going on, everything's virtual. So the person who you're commenting with can be your job search buddy. So make sure you're making those connections. As always, once that's done, please get your questions into the stream. We'll be answering them in just a little bit. So maybe you have questions about your resume, maybe you have questions about your job search strategy or your long-term career strategy. Make sure you're getting them in. We'll be taking a look at those in just a moment. As always, I'm so happy that you're here because we have such a wonderful guest with us today, and I want to welcome her now. Ebony Joyce is the CEO of Next Level Career Services, LLC. So welcome, Ebony. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Andrew.
Definitely, yeah. And we talked not too many weeks ago, and you were so wonderful, and I just thought, I have to have you on the show. So thank you so much for joining us. And we talked a little bit about some tips that job seekers need to know, and specifically about personal branding. So can you tell us a little bit what branding is and why that should be important to job seekers, and should it be important to all job seekers? Because some people may not think it applies to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, personal branding is important to everyone because the thing about a personal brand is you have one whether you want to have one or not. So you might as well manage it correctly. And so the definition of a personal branding is really just being intentional and having the intent of what it is that you want your brand to be and who you want to be known for, and really help you set yourself apart from the other competition in the market. Whether you're currently employed or you're seeking employment, it's always great to be able to figure out, how do I distinguish myself from the other job seekers?
Definitely. And, I think whether people know it or not, they always have a personal brand. And we have so many people joining us in the stream. We have Sudhir from India, Mona from Canada, Karen from my home state of Pennsylvania, Mary from Iowa, Stephen from New Jersey, and everyone who's joining us. If they have a LinkedIn account, if they have a Twitter account, if they're on social media, they have a brand that's already in existence. They may not cultivate it. But for a job seeker who may say, okay, but how do I get started with a personal brand? How do they do that? What steps should they be taking to cultivate that image they want people to find?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. So the first step you want to do is identify who you want to be and what you want to be known for. So that is step number one. And then the way that I say to start to do that is in step number two, is do some assessments. You could use Myers-Briggs assessments, and there are so many other ones that you can use, but to help you identify what your strengths are, what are some of your skill sets, what are you talented in, and things of that nature. And then what you want to do as well is look at some of your previous work performance reviews and what have your managers or coworkers said about you. What are those things that have really shined when you've been in your best? So you want to look at those as well. And then you can also do informational interviews with some of your colleagues and your peers to figure out, what are some of those things that they find you to be best at, because it's really difficult for us to see some of those things. I like to say that it's really difficult to read the label if you're inside the jar, right? So if you ask those people, what are some of those, your strengths and even your weaknesses, that can help you identify what your brand is and help you start to clarify that message about who you want to be and what you want others to perceive you as.
Yes, and I think, one thing that I always tell people too is don't make what you post online too self-promotional. I know a lot of people, they sometimes say like, I need to sell myself. But at the same time, you also have to give of yourself. So if you're reading something that you thought was just so wonderful, make sure you're sharing that. It shows people what you are reading, what you're interested in. So there's so many ways to sort of cultivate that brand. And I think, what you suggested is so important too about talking to people, and also the informational interview part of it is such a wonderful idea too. So thank you so much. And how about we could dive actually right in to one topic that people may struggle with, and it's somewhat tied to personal brand, and it tends to be with workers who've been in the job market for so long. And this question comes from Kira. Is it true that you shouldn't show that you have more than 15 years of experience on a resume? And I think a lot of people sometimes get concerned about this when they see the resume and all the years adding up.
Yes, I like to stick to about 10 to 15 years on a resume. And the reason is because you really want to make sure that the experience on your resume is relative to the roles in which you're applying for. If you've been in the same position or the same organization, even for that same time period, you may have moved around within the organization within that time. So it's okay to show, more in that case. But typically, you want to make sure that the experience that you have is relevant to the roles in which you're seeking. So if it's not relevant to that role, you really don't want to have more than that. And I also like to stick to a resume that is no more than 2 pages. So if your resume is starting to get, beyond that 2 page, you may want to determine, what content on the resume that I have here is really just not relevant anymore.
I agree. And I think there's always that debate over resume length because, in my field of journalism, it's like 1 page is typically the rule because we all like short writing. So if you can't keep it to 1 page, you're done for. Yeah. But then, for 2 pages, it's great. And then I think, as someone who's gone through some resumes, when I get one that's longer than 2 pages, I'm like, oh my God, am I reading a chapter here? What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, it does depend on the industry though, right? So I do want to take that into consideration. If you're in the government resumes, federal resumes, typically tend to be longer than 2 pages. And if you're in an educational setting or industry, then those resumes also tend to be longer than 2 pages. So it can be industry specific, but standard is typically, 2 pages.
Yes, and then academia is a whole different ballpark.
Oh,
I know that. And actually, speaking of academia, we have a question here from Marina, and she wants to know if you have any advice for recent graduates. And, obviously people who just graduated, they're entering this weird, difficult job market that has changed so rapidly. So for someone who's just entering and they're trying to find their footing, what would you suggest they do?
Yeah, now is a challenging time. And so this kind of looks like, 2009 when a lot of those graduates were experiencing the same things. Yeah, I completely understand how you may be feeling. So my recommendation is to, again, it goes back to networking, is to use your network where you can to see, how you can either, maybe an internship, maybe an option, or some additional work and volunteering and community service may be an option if you're having a difficult time landing a role right now. But I definitely say you want to continue to use the network you already have and make sure that they know that you're looking for employment. I think that sometimes we assume that our networks may know what we're looking for, and they may not. So the first thing is to make sure that your current network knows that you're looking for employment, and then be very clear about what it is that you're looking for. Because again, people are willing to help, but they have to know what you're looking for. We don't want to have our network do the work for us, right? So we want to make sure that we make it easy for people to be able to provide us with that assistance where possible. And additionally, if you are having some issues finding some work, my goal or my advice is to look and see if you can do some community service volunteering, side gig, and things of that nature to continue to build on your experience.
Yes, and I think, like you said, the specificity of the help question is so important. I had someone reach out who's a close friend saying they needed a job. So I said, what about this? What about that? And then, everything I gave them ended up sort of, I don't want that. I need this specific thing. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me that beforehand. Otherwise, we wasted about like 15 minutes here talking about these hypothetical jobs you don't want. So I think the specific part of that is very important. And we have questions coming in, and this is something that I think a lot of people are encountering, because I think there are people who are returning to the workforce for a number of reasons, and then there are people who were out of work before the pandemic hit. So we have a question here from Craig, and then a question from Susie that came in before the show. Craig basically said he lost his job last year and then had to go out of the job market for a little while for health reasons. Susie said she had to take some time out of her career to raise children. So for people who experience career gaps, what is your recommendation for addressing that in your marketing materials, your resume, your cover letter, and how do you overcome that obstacle in the job market?
Yeah, thanks, Craig and Susie, for the question. So the first thing I like to do is I like to use what I call a hot formula. So, I like I like formulas and frameworks. So the H is hide, right? I want you to avoid trying to hide the gap in your resume. Employers are going to know and see the gap anyway. So it's very important that you're comfortable, with that gap. The second is the O, which is the opportunity. And so what I want you to do is take the opportunity to explain this in your cover letter. This is a great place to communicate that to recruiters and hiring managers. And then the T is for time. I want you to use this time as an opportunity to do some training, certifications, volunteering, community service, and you can keep it relative to, what you've been doing in the job market. A lot of universities and colleges right now have been offering free courses and training. So, use this time to up level on your skill sets. You can use LinkedIn Learning, and there are several other platforms also that have free training and courses that you can utilize, so that when you go into the interviews, you want to make sure that you can very well articulate that what you've been working on during this time where you've been unemployed. So I think that that's very important. And if you can put all that together, then you will go into the interview on fire.
Yes. And I think, a lot of people, when they have a career gap, they think, oh, I've been sort of sitting idle for so long. But what people also need to remember is that, you haven't been just sitting and doing nothing. You've been talking to other people. You've maybe kept in touch with former colleagues. So you've been networking even passively. So there are like those nuggets of a job search there that you can start building with. So it's one of those things about finding what works for you at that right time. And like you said, taking online courses, doing all those wonderful things that can sort of give you that leg up and propel you forward is so important. So I think that's really helpful to a lot of people. And I think I saw someone, Tina was also asking about career gaps. So I think she would take a lot of away from that too. We also have questions here about ageism. Unfortunately, ageism, it does exist on both ends of the spectrum. Like, if you're just entering, it can be very difficult. And then obviously, as people get older, they experience it either subtly or overtly. So we have a question here from Dolores and Jimmy, which is basically, how do you combat it in the job market, for older workers?
Yeah, absolutely. A great question again. I think the best way to is to really it starts with your mindset, right? So you have to be very comfortable and confident in your ability, even as an experienced job seeker, which is the word I like to use. Even as an experienced job seeker, that you want to make sure that the employer understands why it is that you're looking for this particular role. Use your experience to your advantage. Whether that be the soft skills as far as your communication, maybe you're going to have your ability to get up to speed is much quicker. Your dedication, your hard work, your work ethic, all of those things that really have made you who you are and made you a rock star up until this point in your career are really going to play to your advantage. So the one thing you have to do is, again, you have to own it, and really just, be confident in it as you go into the interview and into the work environment. Speak about the fact that you've worked with, a younger workforce and what that experience has been like to you. Pull out all those positives. And I think that that typically tends to be what I've seen the experienced job seekers have the most experience, most positive outcome with. One of the things that you do want to do is make sure you try to mitigate the risk as much as possible. And what I mean by mitigating the risk is to make sure that one of your branding documents, such as your resume, most importantly, is that you don't have the dates of your education on there. So make sure that you remove those dates. One of the things also that a lot of people don't mention, and a lot of people actually do in their email, is they have years in their email. So that email address, if you have like 19, whatever, could also lead to some assumptions from the recruiter or the hiring manager that maybe this is the year you were born, maybe this is the year that you graduated. They don't know. So I always recommend too that if you're going to have your emails, try to take out any numbers that you may have in there as well.
Yes, I think that's great advice. In fact, I know like 5 people off the top of my head that have years in their email. So that's a great point, and especially the confidence part of it, because I think a lot of people overlook that because they go in worrying about it, and it translates into the interview almost. I think the confidence part of it is.
Yeah, because a lot of times the employer may not be thinking about it, but I think if you go in unsure, that can exude, and that you put that out there, and it was never really even a thought. So just make sure that, again, you use that use your work experience to your advantage. I mean, it is very important. All employers don't want the new job, the younger workforce. Some of them do want and more an experienced workforce. And even for the younger workforce, you have to figure out as well how to use that to your advantage as well. So, being newer into the workforce doesn't have to be an advantage for you either. And I think that, again, like you mentioned, we see it on both ends of the spectrum. If you are in the younger workforce, you do want to be able to speak to, again, things that you've done in your college career, boards that maybe you've sat on, organizations that you've been a part of. And in both cases, your network is really going to be important, so that you don't necessarily have to go through the applicant tracking system. You can go around that and use your network and use referrals in order to land roles instead of going through the traditional applicant tracking process, or that really does play more of an impact. So try to find ways to use your network to help you with that.
Yes, and I think smart employers, they look for a mix of younger, older workers. And one thing that always stuck with me is when I was a medical reporter, there was a huge push during that time to hire surgeons who grew up playing video games and things like that because they were doing robotic surgery. So these hospitals snatched them up. And then the next thing you knew, those same hospitals a few years later said, oh, dear God, we have to go hire older surgeons because they could do more complicated surgeries that weren't being able to do in robotics. So the smart employers, they go for that mix of experience, and hopefully they're smart enough to find that. And going back to the confidence point of this, we have a question here from Aman, who basically says, how do you not stress going into the interview? I don't think you could ever get to zero stress because that would be worrisome. But, how do you maybe prepare yourself and also go in a little bit at ease so you're not overly nervous?
Yes. So the answer is, great question, by the way, but the answer is preparation. The more you are prepared for the interview, the more confident you're going to be, and the less worried you will be about it. So again, when I think about prepping for an interview, I really say that you should spend on average between 3 to 5 hours preparing for the interview. That means that you've done the research on the company, you understand their mission, their vision, and their values. That doesn't mean that you have to be able to regurgitate that to them, but you really want to make sure that you do understand it, and that you understand everyone, and you're familiar, you've done your research, you've stalked them a little bit on LinkedIn and other social media platforms to understand who is going to be interviewing you. And so you really get information about their background as well. You really understand the role in which you're applying for, and the value which you add and which you bring to that role. So I think if you really prepare, it will, again, you're going to have some nervousness because you're going into the unknown, but being prepared will help you ease that tension and that stress that you may have.
Definitely. I think preparation is key. As someone who writes a lot, I get nervous when I have to write something and I haven't been able to do as much research as I like, but as soon as I have done the research and I'm prepared to write something, I am less nervous approaching a page. And I think that applies to so many areas of life. Like once you've done the legwork, it's just like, you could go and move forward almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we have a question here for Mimi, and cover letters is always a hot topic. And Mimi basically says, what is the ideal cover letter? How do they digest them? Do recruiters like full pages, or do they like more introductory paragraphs with bullets? What would your suggestion be?
All right. Yes. So the cover letter, it always comes up. The cover letter, again, let's start at the beginning. So a lot of recruiters and hiring managers don't read the cover letter at first glance, right? So I know we have the statistics show that 50% of recruiters read them and 50% don't. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you at least have a cover letter. And if the application requires for you to submit a cover letter, that you do have one. On average, the cover letter should not be more than 1 page. You want to be clear and concise in that. And it typically has, 3 paragraphs. You have your intro paragraph, and in your intro paragraph, you want to be able to mention a referral if you have one. This is that great place to do that. And then you have, it's just like, in high school, how we learn how to write papers. Then you have your body. So your body is going to be next. And that's where you're going to explain your achievements and your accomplishments for which the role in which you're applying for. And then that last paragraph is going to be what I like to call your CTA, your call to action. And that's where you're going to really close out the resume. And that call to action is going to be, for the employer to, provide your contact information, to reach out to you for an interview, or whatever that call to action is for you. The one thing I want people to also take into consideration is that your cover letter can be multi-purposeful. You could use that as part of your email introduction. So if they do not want a cover letter, you could use that in the body of an email as well. So you can use your cover letter for multi-purposes. It doesn't just have to be just for the cover letter purposes only. So if they don't need one, you can use it there as well.
Yes. And I think, and so you're overall pro cover letter then?
I am. It depends. If you're going to, if you're going to write a generic cover letter, then the answer is no. Yeah. If your cover letter is going to be specific to that particular person, and if you're going to be on a panel, or if you met with multiple people, then you should make sure that you customize that cover letter for each individual that you're meeting with. So if you're going to just do a basic general cover letter, then I would say don't turn in a cover letter at all if you're not going to make it specific. But if you are going to do one, make sure you have it specific and customized. So my answer is it depends.
Yes, I agree. I always tell people, if you're not going to make it worth the person's time, don't do it. And one of my favorite stories is actually Leonardo da Vinci, I think, came up with the first cover letter, and it got him his job. So, he wanted to be the architect of Milan, and he was trying to figure out how to sell himself. So he wrote a letter to the Duke of Milan, and he ended up getting the job because he went through and said, I did this, this, and this, and this is how I can make it work for you. So I always think, if you follow his formula, it's great. So
it worked for him.
Yeah, exactly. And then, we have a question here about the resumes, or the cover letter's cousin, better known cousin, the resume, which is, should you only have one resume that conforms to an applicant tracking system, which is sort of the resume sorting robots that we talk about. And that's from Lisa. So should you only have one ATS ready resume, or should you have a few?
All right, Lisa, thank you for this question. So I believe that because you're applying for, and this again, you're applying for multiple roles, and there are going to be various keywords within every job description. So if you are trying to go, you're applying through an applicant tracking system, you're not going to know, if you have just one master resume, what those keywords are based on that one resume. So I say that you want to tailor your resume based on that job description. So yes, you should have a master resume, but then you should also have variations of your resume to fit that particular job description. Now, the one thing I want to say is that you want to make sure that at this point that you have become very clear on the targeted roles in which you're applying for. So you should not have a resume for accounting and marketing and HR, right? Like you should have become very niche in what it is that you're looking for. So you're applying for accounting roles. Maybe it's an accounting manager, maybe it's an accounting specialist, and those things. So the keywords won't change too much, but their keywords are going to be different. And so you want to make sure that you make those minor tweaks and changes as you're applying for those different roles.
Got it. And then we have a question here that I just saw on the stream from Rick, who basically wants to know what your opinion is about thank you notes and thank you emails.
All right, Rick, great question. My opinion on the thank you is very much like the resume. If you're going to send a generic thank you, then again, don't waste your time and don't waste the recruiters and hiring managers' time. If you're going to make that thank you very specific to what you all talked about in the interview, right? So you're going to mention, hey, I know you mentioned in the interview that you were looking for someone who has, Adobe experience. You wanted someone to have, these qualifications. And then you can speak to, how those qualifications you have and the value that you can bring with that into the organization, then absolutely go for it. Send a thank you letter, send a thank you note. What I don't recommend is that you have a pre-template, thank you card already out in your car, and then you go out to your car, right? And you just go in and hand it to the reception for them to turn it in. I want it to be very thoughtful and spend some time to do it. And so I do recommend that you send that within the first 4 to 24 hours, after you've gone through you've gone through the interview and you spent some time really thinking about, the organization and, anything that you may have missed or you did not bring up, you have that opportunity to bring it up in the thank you. So again, if it's going to be generic and general, don't worry about it. If it's going to be intentional and specific and strategic, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice because I think the idea of, drilling down into something specific and something actionable where, you could say, this is a great organization. I especially like the structure of, the sales organization because X, Y, and Z. I think those are the notes where people say, oh, they thought about this, they're invested, and that's what leaves a lasting impact. So I think that's really wonderful advice.
Yeah, because you're going in there thinking like if all things are equal, right? Now you've decided to set yourself apart, and that's what we want to do, especially in today's market. How do we set ourselves apart? 95% of the individuals are not going to send a thank you, and if they do, they're going to be, very generic and general. But because you're watching this live, now that you should make yours very specific and intentional. So you're going to be in that top 5%, and that's exactly where you want to be.
Yeah. And there's also those hiring managers and recruiters out there who will say, like, I don't hire anyone who doesn't send me a thank you note. I don't know why they say that, but they're out there. So that's also something to keep in mind. And we have a couple questions here that talk about unemployment during the pandemic. And this one is from Andrea, and I think it's a really great question. Many who are unemployed due to the pandemic are going into long-term unemployment at this point, which is very true. There are people now who've been unemployed for more than 6 months. They were laid off at the beginning. And she says, what is your advice for them to keep moving forward? And I think that is something a lot of people struggle with, either because they don't know what to do next or they struggle with motivation. So for those people, what would you suggest?
Oh, wow. This is an amazing question. And yes, while the numbers say that, the job market is getting better, we still know so many people who are still unemployed or underemployed at this point. I just really want to say, the job searching process is a journey. It is not a destination. And so one of the things I want you to do is, find a network an accountability group in which you can lean on and communicate with, because we all are having our struggles during this time. And so I think that it's great that you have your network of friends and family to definitely reach out to and communicate with. In addition to that, I want to just say, use this time to do some reflection, right? Determine and decide, what do you want your next stint of your career to look like? What do you really want to do? You can use this time to really carve out that niche and determine, what is that next step in your career journey going to look like? And so this is where you can do some re-education and some retraining, and again, figure out how you can use those things to lead you to that next career level. And so maybe you want to make a pivot, maybe you want to make a transition, and now is the best time to do that. So take that into consideration, and good luck.
Yes, and I think one of the things that I recommended to a friend of mine who's been unemployed since the start of the pandemic is that we had a mutual friend who's unemployed too during the same length of time. And I said, why don't you two actually talk to each other? I said, you could talk about what you've tried, what they've tried, and then you just get that social support. And
Absolutely.
It can be beneficial just to have that other person who's going through the same thing. And hopefully that's what some people get out of these broadcasts, is that, you see other people who are going through the same thing. And then a question that I want to get to before we go is, this one's from Richard, and it's about recent graduates, which is it advisable for a fresh graduate to apply for a job requesting 3 to 4 years experience? So that's from Richard. But I assume there's a lot of people out there who view job postings and say, I don't meet all these qualifications. So what would you say to Richard and people who say, okay, I meet like 4 of the 7 requirements that they're asking for?
Yes. So good, Richard. Thank you. What I would say is, the job description is kind of looked at as, the purple unicorn. This is like the employer's wish list. If they can, the perfect employer or employee, would have, all of these qualifications. And we know that there is no perfect employee or candidate, but you can be the right candidate. So if you meet most of those qualifications, I say go ahead and apply anyway. But the one thing you want to make sure is that you're not discounting some of the experience that you may have had that was non-paid. So if you had volunteering, community service, or you've been in organizations within campus that still could, play a part in some of those qualifications that you think you don't have. So really make sure that you really understand the job descriptions, because job descriptions are written poorly anyway, unfortunately. So I'm going to say, you want to go ahead and apply. And if the requirements, if you meet, more, half the requirements, go ahead and apply anyway. But the other thing you may want to do as well as just applying online is seeing if you can find other individuals who work for the company online as well, and make sure you can network with them, because maybe that job isn't the job for you, but there may be another job within the organization. If you start to build that relationships and grow and nurture those relationships, you can find something that way. So sometimes we have to go around the applicant tracking system and network and use that referral opportunities to our advantage.
Yes, great advice. And then for a last question, we have sort of a broad one, and this one's from Riddy, who I think I saw earlier in the broadcast from London. So thanks for joining us. And Riddy asked, with so many people job searching, how can you stand out? And what's your advice for job seekers?
Yes. So this is where your personal brand is really important, because you want to make sure that you can identify and articulate who it is who are you and what do you do and what you bring to the organization. So if you're clear on that, again, you want to make sure that, out of 250 applicants, and this was before COVID, right? So now that number has increased. I don't know what the number is, but just imagine that you're in a sea of 249 other applicants. How do you stand out? What is your unique brand proposition? So if you are a digital marketer, how are you different from other digital marketers? I've recently, one of my clients, she was a nurse, and of course, right, we know there are hundreds of nurses out there, right? But the one thing that she had that a lot of nurses did not have that helped her land the role was that she had international experience, right? So she was able to use that international experience to say, hey, this is what makes me different, and this is how I have my unique value proposition that stands out amongst all the hundreds or thousands of nurses that could have potentially applied for this particular role. So you make sure that you find out what is your unique value proposition and what makes you stand out amongst the other fish in the sea.
Yes, I think that's fantastic advice. And I think with people who may struggle to say, what is your unique, strengths and values, you could ask people and they'll tell you.
Yeah.
So I always think that's a great advice just to ask.
This goes back to the question earlier, right? Again, do that assessment, have those conversations with your friends, your family, and your colleagues and say, hey, what is it about me that, makes me different? Look at your work performance. Where are some of the times when you stood out? Where were some of the projects that you really just shine in, right? When do you thrive? Where do you thrive best? And when do you thrive best? So you want to make sure that you take all that into account and really decide, what do you want your personal brand to be? Because your brand is unique to you. And you want to make sure that when you go into an interview or that when you submit your application, that you're just not another name on a piece of paper, that your value, your brand, and who you are really comes through.
Yes, and you have a wonderful brand, Ebony, and I thank you so much for joining us today. Our members got so much out of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and I hope that everyone watching was looking at the bottom of the screen. We had Ebony's LinkedIn profile URL, and I think it's right down there right now. So be sure to go follow her. She posts some wonderful content. And then I know there's so many questions in the stream that we weren't able to get to, so I hope you will join us next week too. We'll have another wonderful expert joining us. It'll be the founder of CV Labs. She's also a career advisor, Anna Lokatokova. And we'll be back here on Friday, October 23rd, at 12 p.m. And as always, you could follow me. I have a newsletter called Get Hired, so we also cover a lot of these topics as well. You can find that on my profile. And also for next week's show, Juliet, who works with us at LinkedIn, posted the link in the comments, and it'll also be in the post above this video, so you can RSVP right away. And I hope, like I said, I hope you'll join us next week. And until then, please follow your local health guidelines, stay safe and well, because you can only get hired and you can only be a good candidate if you're well enough to do so. So until then, stay safe and best of luck.